I think the humans are incomprehensible to us, Mora said carefully. They evolved in hell and brought hell's lessons with them to the stars. They know 1,000 ways to kill, and they teach those methods to their children as cultural heritage. They commemorate their wars with monuments and days of remembrance. They write songs about battles and tell stories that glorify combat. This is not a species that has transcended violence. This is a species that has weaponized it. But they came when we called, Zephyra said. No one else did. Yes, Mora agreed. And perhaps that is the most disturbing fact of all. The peaceful species of the galaxy heard our plea and calculated that helping us was too dangerous, too expensive, too difficult. The humans heard our plea and calculated how quickly they could reach us. What does that tell you about their nature? Before Zephyra could answer, alarms screamed through the resonance chamber. Counselor Theron's form flashed urgent red patterns. Supreme Luminary, the Cravor fleet is moving. They're breaking blockade formation and heading toward the human ships. Show me. The holographic display expanded, showing the Cravor vessels moving with predatory confidence. They outnumbered the human fleet nearly 4-1. Zephyra counted 8 human ships, all smaller than the Cravor capital vessels. This was going to be a massacre, just not the one the Velkari had hoped for. A new communication channel opened, and a massive Cravor face filled the display. Warlord Zethrak was a veteran of dozens of conquests, his exoskeleton covered in battle scars and victory markings. His mandibles clicked in what the translation software identified as amusement. Deathworlders, Zethrak said, his voice a harsh rasp. I have heard legends of your kind. Species that evolve in impossible conditions and think that makes them warriors. It does not. It makes you survivors, nothing more. You have 30 seconds to leave this system before I add your ships to my collection of defeated foes. The human response came not from Captain Chen, but from another voice, male and younger. This is Lieutenant Commander James Rodriguez of the UNS Defiant. Warlord Zethrak, you are in violation of Galactic Coalition law. You have committed acts of war against a peaceful species. You have one opportunity to withdraw your forces and face trial. If you refuse, we will remove you by force. Zethrak's laughter sounded like metal grinding against stone. You have 8 ships. I have 37. Your mathematics are as flawed as your courage. Prepare to die, humans. See, that's where you're wrong about us, Rodriguez said. And Zephyra heard something in his voice that made her crystalline core run cold. It wasn't anger or fear. It was anticipation. You counted our ships. You calculated our firepower. You ran the numbers and thought you understood the situation. But you made one critical mistake. And what is that, Deathworlder? You assumed we care about the numbers. The human fleet split into 4 groups and accelerated directly toward the Cravor blockade. There was no defensive formation, no attempt to maintain distance and use range advantage. They were charging straight into the teeth of overwhelming firepower, and from what Zephyra could see on her displays, they were smiling as they did it. Crystalline Elder Mora spoke quietly beside her. Light preserve us all. I think we have just learned what it means to call Deathworlders for help. The battle was about to begin, and Zephyra knew with absolute certainty that the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Neither would the Velkari. The question was whether they would survive long enough to regret their desperate call for help. The price of salvation, the Cravor weapons fired first. Energy beams capable of melting through reinforced titanium lanced across the void, converging on the lead human ship. The UN's Defiant's shields flared brilliant white as they absorbed the initial barrage. Zephyra watched her displays with mounting horror as more Cravor vessels joined the assault. 37 warships focusing their fire on 8 human vessels. The mathematics were simple and brutal, except the human ships were no longer where the Cravor targeting system said they should be. The Defiant rolled, twisted, and dove beneath the incoming fire with movements that seemed impossible for vessels of their size. The other human ships followed suit, their formation dissolving into what looked like chaos but was actually something far more dangerous. Controlled aggression. They are evading, Counselor Theron said, his crystalline form pulsing with confusion. But they cannot evade forever. The Cravor will adapt their targeting algorithms. Zephyra was about to agree when the human ships opened fire, not with energy weapons that the Cravor shields could absorb, but with something else entirely. Solid projectiles accelerated to relativistic speeds, followed by what the sensors identified as explosive missiles and something called railgun rounds. The Cravor shields, perfectly designed to dissipate energy, suddenly had to contend with physical matter traveling at significant fractions of light speed. The first Cravor cruiser died in silence. A railgun round punched through its shields as if they weren't there, penetrated the hull and detonated the main reactor. The ship simply ceased to exist, replaced by an expanding sphere of superheated debris. Before the Cravor fleet could react, 2 more cruisers suffered the same fate. Impossible, Crystalline Elder Mora whispered. They found the weakness in Cravor shielding in minutes. It took our scientists 3 days just to understand why our weapons were ineffective. Captain Chen's voice came through on the communication channel. Calm, despite the chaos unfolding around her. Supreme Luminary, I'm broadcasting our tactical data to your defense network. The Cravor shields are tuned for energy weapons. Kinetic impacts bypass them almost entirely. If you have any mass drivers or projectile systems, now would be the time to activate them. We have none, Zafara admitted. We never developed such weapons. Then stay behind your planetary shields and let us work. There was a pause filled with weapon impacts and shouted orders. Marines, prepare for boarding action. Target the command ship. Rodriguez, take your squadron and eliminate those troop transports. I don't want a single Cravor boot touching Luminara's surface. Zafara barely had time to process the word boarding before she saw it happen. 3 human ships broke from the main engagement and accelerated toward Warlord Zethrek's flagship. The Cravor vessel was enormous, nearly 2 kilometers long and bristling with weapons. It fired everything it had at the approaching humans, turning the space between them into a hell of energy discharge and explosive detonations. The human ships took catastrophic damage. Zafara watched hull plating vaporize, saw atmosphere venting from breached sections, counted secondary explosions that would have crippled any Velkari vessel. But the humans kept coming. One ship, the UNS Valkyrie, lost its entire port side to a direct hit. It should have been dead in space. Instead, it adjusted course using only its starboard thrusters and rammed directly into the Cravor flagship's shield generator array. The impact was devastating for both vessels. The Valkyrie broke apart, its crew compartment tumbling away into space, but the Cravor shields flickered and died, leaving the flagship vulnerable. The second human ship, the UNS Hammer, fired a full spread of missiles directly into the exposed hull. Armored plating designed to withstand energy weapons proved useless against high-explosive warheads. Massive sections of the Cravor ship tore open like paper, and then the Marines deployed. Zafara had never seen anything like it. Small pods launched from the third human ship, the UNS Relentless, each containing what her sensors identified as 4 to 6 human soldiers. The pods fired chemical rockets to adjust their trajectory, aiming for the breaches in the Cravor hull. Several pods were destroyed by point defense systems, but most reached their targets and attached themselves to the torn metal. We have visual feed from one of the pods, Theron said, bringing up a new display. I think you need to see this, Supreme Luminary. The footage showed the interior of a Cravor warship from the perspective of a human Marine's helmet camera. The human moved through corridors that would have been spacious for Velkari, but required the humans to duck and move carefully. A Cravor warrior appeared at the end of the corridor, standing 3 meters tall with exoskeleton armor that could deflect most small arms fire. The creature raised a weapon that fired superheated plasma. The human Marine didn't hesitate. He dove forward in a movement that defied Zafara's understanding of tactics. While rolling, he fired a weapon that launched physical projectiles with explosive tips. The first 3 rounds hit the Cravor's armor and detonated, cracking the exoskeleton. The 4th and 5th rounds found the gaps and penetrated the warrior's body cavity. The Cravor fell and the human was already moving past it, speaking rapidly into his communication system. The desperate call. The crystal spires of Luminara caught the light of 3 suns, refracting it into cascades of color that painted the sky in impossible hues. For 50,000 years, the Velkari had lived in peace beneath those dancing lights. Their civilization built on harmony and the manipulation of pure energy. Their bodies were delicate, translucent beings that shimmered like living gemstones, with consciousness flowing through crystalline neural networks instead of organic brains. They had never known war. They had never needed to. Supreme Luminary Zafara stood in the central resonance chamber, her crystalline form pulsing with distress patterns that any Velkari could read from across a room. Through the transparent walls of the chamber, she could see the orbital platforms burning, The Craver Dominion had arrived 3 days ago, and in those 3 days everything the Velkari had built was crumbling. The Cravor were nightmares given form. Massive insectoid creatures with exoskeletons like black armor. They stood nearly 3 meters tall with 6 limbs designed for both locomotion and combat. Their ships were brutal things, all sharp angles and weapon ports, built by a species that had conquered 47 star systems through sheer military might. They had sent a simple message when they arrived. Surrender your energy reserves and your technology or be harvested for resources. Zephyra had tried negotiation. The Cravor had responded by destroying the Luminara defense station, killing 8,000 Velkari in a single coordinated strike. Their adaptive shields had simply absorbed the Velkari's energy weapons, turning the defensive systems into nothing more than light shows. The Velkari had no projectile weapons, no kinetic options, no experience with the kind of warfare the Cravor practiced as naturally as breathing. Counselor Theron approached, his usually bright form dimmed with grief. Supreme Luminary, the outer colonies are going dark. The Cravor are systematically destroying our communication arrays. We have perhaps 2 days before they begin landing ground forces. And the distress signals? Zephyra asked, though she already knew the answer from his darkened hue. The Peltharian Republic expressed sympathy but declined to intervene. The Kulathi Confederacy suggested we open diplomatic channels with the Cravor. Theron's form flickered with what might have been bitter laughter if the Velkari possessed such a concept. The Sorvani sent prayers. No one is coming. Zephyra felt something crack inside her crystalline core. They were alone. A species of scholars and artists and philosophers, facing an enemy that had spent millennia perfecting the art of destruction. In 2 days, the Cravor would land. In a week, Luminara would be strip-mined, its people enslaved or eliminated, its beauty reduced to raw materials for the Dominion's endless war machine. There is one more response, Theron said quietly. It came from far outside our sector, a species called humanity, from a world called Earth. I am not familiar with them. Neither was I until I accessed the Galactic Archive. Theron projected a holographic display between them. Earth is classified as a Class 15 Death World Supreme Luminary, the highest danger rating in the classification system. Zephyra examined the data with growing horror. Earth's atmospheric pressure would crush most spacefaring species. Its gravity was more than double what the Velkari could survive without assistance. The planet's weather systems included hurricanes that could level cities, earthquakes that split continents, and temperature variations that swung from lethal heat to deadly cold. The oceans contained enough salt to poison most species, and were filled with predators that humans classified as wildlife. The land itself was hostile, covered in plants that could cause allergic reactions or death, populated by creatures that hunted in coordinated packs, and the humans had evolved there. Not just survived, but thrived. They had climbed to the top of Earth's brutal food chain through a combination of endurance, intelligence, and a disturbing capacity for violence. The archive contained historical records of humanity's development, and Zephyra wished she hadn't read them. Humans had spent 10,000 years fighting each other, developing increasingly sophisticated ways to kill their own species. They had split the atom and immediately weaponized it. They had reached space while simultaneously perfecting intercontinental ballistic missiles. These are the beings who answered our distress call? Zephyra asked. They are the only ones who answered, Theron corrected gently. Their message was simple. Help is coming. Hold on. Zephyra looked out at the burning orbital platforms again. What choice did they have? The Cravor would show no mercy. At least the humans had offered help, even if everything about them suggested they were predators barely contained by a thin veneer of civilization. Accept their assistance, she said finally, and pray to the light that we survive both the Cravor and our rescuers. The human fleet arrived 4 days later, ahead of their projected schedule. Zephyra received the notification in the middle of another Cravor assault on the planetary shields. The defensive barriers were holding, but projections showed they would fail within 18 hours. After that, there would be nothing between the Cravor landing craft and Luminara's cities. Supreme Luminary, the human vessels have entered the system, Counselor Theron reported. They request immediate communication with you. Establish the link. The holographic display materialized and Zephyra got her first look at a human. The woman on the screen was both fascinating and disturbing. Her skin was dark brown, smooth but showing signs of wear that suggested a hard life. Her eyes were positioned forward like a predator's, designed for tracking prey. Her hair was black and pulled back in a severe style that emphasized the angular structure of her skull. She wore a uniform that was primarily dark blue with insignia Zephyra didn't recognize. "Supreme Luminary Zephyra?" the human asked. Her voice was deep and carried an undertone of command that made Zephyra instinctively want to comply. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the United Nations Starship Defiant. We received your distress call. What's your current situation?" "Captain Chen, I am grateful for your response." Zephyra chose her words carefully. "The Cravor Dominion has blockaded our planet. They have destroyed our orbital defenses and are preparing for ground assault. Our weapons are ineffective against their shielding technology. We have no military experience, no standing army, no defensive capabilities beyond energy barriers that are failing." Chen's face remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes that Zephyra couldn't interpret. "How many ships in the Cravor fleet?" 37 capital vessels, approximately 200 support craft, and an unknown number of landing ships. "And they're all in system?" "Yes. They have established a blockade around Luminara itself." Captain Chen turned to someone off-screen. "Get me tactical assessments on all enemy vessels. I want weak points, command structure, and supply lines identified within the hour." She looked back at Zephyra. "Supreme Luminary, we're going to help you, but I need you to understand something. We're not diplomats. We're not here to negotiate or find a peaceful solution. The Cravor made their choice when they attacked civilians. We're here to remove them from your system by whatever means necessary. Some of those means are going to be violent. If that's a problem, you need to tell me now." Zephyra felt her crystalline form pulse with conflicting emotions. Violence was abhorrent to the Velkari. They had built their entire civilization on the rejection of aggression. But what was the alternative? Death, slavery? The extinction of everything they had created? "Do what you must, Captain," Zephyra said quietly. "We have no other options," Chen nodded. "Then I suggest you keep civilian broadcasts limited for the next few days. War isn't pretty, and I don't want your people traumatized more than necessary." She paused. "One more thing. We're going to win this fight. I promise you that. But winning comes with a price. Some of my people aren't going to make it home. I need you to understand that humans are about to die for Luminara. Remember that when you see what we're capable of." The communication ended, leaving Zephyra alone with Theron and a growing sense of dread. She pulled up the Galactic Archive again and dove deeper into human history. What she found made her question whether they had made a terrible mistake. Humans had fought hundreds of wars. They had developed weapons that could destroy entire cities in microseconds. They had tactics and strategies refined over millennia of killing each other. They had words like genocide and war crime that suggested they had learned what was too horrible even by their violent standards. They had bomber pilots who had dropped nuclear weapons on population centers and lived with that decision for the rest of their lives. They had soldiers who had fought in jungles and deserts and frozen wastelands, enduring conditions that would kill most species in hours. And now those soldiers were coming to Luminara. Crystalline Elder Mora entered the resonance chamber, her ancient form barely glowing. She had studied at the archive for 3,000 years and was considered the wisest of their species. "Supreme Luminary, I have reviewed the human files. I believe we should prepare for the possibility that we are trading one invasion for another. You think the humans will betray us?" "Hallway secure. Advancing to engineering. Martinez is hit. Punctured suit. Ceiling breach now," another voice responded. "Rodriguez's squadron is eliminating the transports. 40% of Cravor ground forces destroyed. Keep pushing, Lieutenant Stone. We need that flagship neutralized." Zephyra realized she was watching Lieutenant Marcus Stone, the leader of the Marine boarding party. His helmet camera showed a nightmare of close combat as his team fought their way deeper into the Cravor vessel. The humans moved with frightening efficiency, using tactics that seemed reckless but were actually calculated risks. They threw objects called grenades around corners before advancing. They used the ship's own structure for cover. When wounded, they kept fighting until they physically couldn't continue. Zephyra watched one human Marine take a plasma hit to the leg that burned through armor and flesh. The Marine, a woman named Corporal Lisa Park according to the identification system, screamed in pain but didn't fall back. She tied a tourniquet above the wound, injected herself with something from her medical kit, and continued firing at the Cravor defenders. Only when the corridor was cleared did she allow her teammates to carry her to the evacuation point. Why do they not retreat? Crystalline Elder Mora asked, her voice filled with horror and awe. They are wounded. They could fall back to their ships. Because the mission isn't complete, Captain Chen answered. Zephyra hadn't realized the channel was still open. Because if they retreat, the Cravor flagship stays operational. Because Marines don't abandon the mission unless ordered to do so, or physically prevented from continuing. Welcome to human warfare, Supreme Luminary. This is what we are. This is what was required to survive Earth. This is what comes to your aid when you call for help. The main space battle continued with horrifying intensity. The human ships were faster and more maneuverable than the Cravor vessels, but they were also smaller and more fragile. Zephyra watched the UNS Marathon take multiple direct hits that tore away sections of its hull. The ship's captain, a man named William Foster, calmly redirected power from destroyed sections and continued the fight. His vessel was bleeding atmosphere and crew members into space, and he kept firing until the enemy cruiser targeting him was destroyed. Then the Marathon's reactor went critical. Captain Foster had 60 seconds to evacuate his crew. He used 50 of those seconds to position his dying ship between the Cravor fleet and a cluster of Velkari orbital habitats. When the Marathon exploded, its debris shield protected 300,000 Velkari civilians from incoming fire. Captain Foster and 47 crew members died in the explosion. The remaining crew escaped in pods that the human fleet immediately recovered. Counselor Theron's form had gone nearly transparent with shock. They sacrificed themselves deliberately, knowingly. They protected our people, Zephyra corrected quietly. Even as they died, they thought of us. Lieutenant Stone's team reached the Cravor flagship's engineering section. The camera showed a massive chamber filled with power conduits and the pulsing reactor that drove the enormous vessel. Cravor warriors had fortified the position, knowing it was the obvious target. There were at least 30 defenders, all in full combat armor, positioned behind reinforced barriers. Stone's team numbered 9 Marines. The odds were worse than 3 to 1. Stone didn't hesitate. Plant charges on the reactor support columns. I'll draw their fire. What happened next would haunt Zephyra for the rest of her life. Lieutenant Marcus Stone stood up from cover and walked into the open chamber. The Cravor opened fire immediately, their plasma weapons converging on his position. Stone's armor began to fail, pieces burning away as the superheated energy overwhelmed his shields. He fired his weapon with one hand while his other hand worked the controls on his suit, rerouting power to keep the critical systems functional. He was buying time. Seconds. That was all his team needed. While the Cravor focused on the insane human walking toward them through a storm of weapons fire, 8 other Marines placed explosive charges on critical structural points. Stone fell to his knees as his armor finally gave out completely. Smoke rose from his body where plasma had burned through to flesh. Charges set, someone reported. Marcus, get out of there. Stone tried to stand, failed, tried again. Won't make it, he said, his voice strained with pain. Blow it, complete the mission. Negative, Lieutenant. We're coming for you. That's an order, Sergeant. Blow the charges. Zephyra watched as 2 Marines broke cover and ran toward their fallen lieutenant. They reached him just as the charges detonated. The explosion tore through the engineering section, rupturing power conduits and destabilizing the reactor. The entire team ran for the breach in the hull where their entry pod waited. Stone was being carried by his team, leaving a trail of blood on the metal floor. They made it to the pod with 3 seconds to spare. The Cravor flagship's reactor lost containment, and the massive warship tore itself apart from the inside. Warlord Zethrak died in the explosion, along with his entire command staff. The Cravor fleet, suddenly leaderless and facing an enemy that refused to die, broke formation and retreated to the outer system. The battle was over. Humanity had won, but victory had come at a terrible price. The UNS Marathon was gone. The UNS Valkyrie was destroyed. The UNS Hammer was barely functional. 43 Marines had died in the boarding action. The human fleet had 347 confirmed casualties and 892 wounded, many critically. Captain Chen requested a communication link with Zephyra. When the hologram appeared, Zephyra barely recognized the human commander. Chen's uniform was scorched in places, and there was a dark stain on her shoulder that might have been blood. Her face showed exhaustion that went beyond the physical. Supreme Luminary, the Cravor, have withdrawn beyond your system's edge. My ships are damaged. But we can maintain a defensive position until your planetary shields are fully restored. We'll also leave you the technical specifications for kinetic weapons. You shouldn't face this problem again. Captain Chen, I do not know what to say. Zephyra's crystalline form pulsed with a complex mixture of emotions she didn't have words for. Your people died for us. They sacrificed themselves for a species they barely know. That's what we do, Chen said simply. We protect those who can't protect themselves. It's not about knowing you. It's about what's right. I must confess something, Zephyra said quietly. When we learned what your species was, when we saw the violence you were capable of, we regretted calling you. We feared we had invited something worse than the Cravor. Captain Chen was quiet for a moment. I understand. We are violent. We are dangerous. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day, and we learned to kill back. But Supreme Luminary, let me tell you something about humanity. We chose to aim our violence at threats instead of innocence. We chose to use our strength to protect instead of conquer. We chose to answer distress calls from species we've never met because someone needed help. Violence is a tool. What matters is how you use it. Crystalline Elder Mora stepped forward. Captain Chen, I spent 3,000 years studying civilizations. I believed that true advancement meant transcending violence entirely. But today I watched your species demonstrate something I had never considered. Violence can be virtuous when it protects the innocent. Strength can be honorable when it serves the weak. You have taught us that pacifism only works when someone else is willing to fight for it. 3 months passed. The Cravor never returned to the Luminara system. Word had spread through the Dominion that humans had killed Warlord Zethrak and destroyed half his fleet, with a force 1/5 its size. The Cravor, for all their military might, understood when they faced a predator more dangerous than themselves. The Velkari rebuilt their orbital stations with human assistance. Engineers from Earth showed them how to construct kinetic defense systems, not to make them warriors, but to give them the tools to protect themselves. Cultural exchange programs began, though they were awkward at first. Humans struggled with the low gravity and found Velkari music almost painfully beautiful. Velkari struggled with human food, couldn't understand human humor, and found their sports disturbingly violent. But understanding grew. The Velkari learned that humans collected broken things and fixed them. They learned that humans kept small animals as companions and mourned them when they died. They learned that humans wrote poetry about love and created art about peace, even while maintaining the weapons of war. They were contradictions, capable of terrible violence and profound gentleness, often within the same individual. Zephyra stood in the rebuilt resonance chamber, looking up at the crystal spires that once again caught the light of 3 suns. A memorial now stood in the central plaza of Luminara's capital. It bore the names of every human who had died defending their world. 347 names, carved in crystal that would last 10,000 years. Captain Chen visited for the dedication ceremony, along with Lieutenant Marcus Stone, who had survived his injuries and received something humans called the Medal of Honor. Zephyra approached them as the ceremony concluded. Captain Lieutenant, I owe you an apology, Zephyra said. We judged your species by your capacity for violence without understanding your capacity for sacrifice. We saw the warrior and missed the protector. Stone smiled, and Zephyra had learned enough about humans to recognize it as genuine. No apology needed, Supreme Luminary. Most species react that way when they meet us. We're used to being the scary ones in the room. But you came anyway, Zephyra said. Even knowing we feared you, even knowing we might reject you afterward, you came because it was the right thing to do. That's humanity in a nutshell, Captain Chen said. We're loud, we're violent, we're crude by your standards. But when someone sends out a distress call, we're also the first ones through the door. We learned a long time ago that strength without compassion is just cruelty. We have the strength, so we choose to use it compassionately. Crystalline Elder Mora joined them, her ancient form glowing with renewed vitality. The galaxy is learning a valuable lesson from your species, Captain Chen. Peace is not the absence of violence. Peace is having the strength to protect it. The Velkari regretted our distress call when we learned what you were. Now we are grateful beyond measure that you answered. As the 3 suns set over Luminara, painting the crystal spires in shades of crimson and gold, Zephyra understood a fundamental truth about the universe. The galaxy needed both kinds of species. The Velkari who could dream of peace and the humans who could defend it. Together, they were stronger than either could be alone. The Deathworlders had come when called, and the galaxy would never forget it. Neither would the Velkari. The lesson was carved in crystal and written in human sacrifice. When you face extinction, call the species that knows how to survive. Call the Deathworlders. Call humanity. And pray you're on their side when they arrive.